Jacob Sullum from Reason Magazine with us. Jacob, thanks for your time, sir.
Sure, thanks for having me.
You bet. All right, a momentous day when it comes to gun control with the unveiling of the Manchin-Toomey background check bill. You had a piece yesterday or a couple days ago at Reason's Hit and Run blog talking about President Obama on gun control, how he's been saying this is not about politics, unless, of course, you happen to disagree with the president.
That's right. I mean, this is the subject of my column this week as well, because his push is all about doing it for the children, and for children who might be murdered in the future, children who were murdered in the past, their grieving parents, and so on and so forth. And at the same time that he is saying it's too bad that there's so much acrimony in this debate, and that there's so little empathy, that people can't see things from the other side's perspective.
Right.
He's essentially accusing his opponents of not caring about the mass murder of children, because if they don't support his proposals, that's what's going to happen. And the only reason for people not to support his proposals is if they just don't care. And it's a little bit fuzzy exactly what motive he has in mind. He talks about it being political. That's politics is the only thing that can stop this from passing, he says. Of course, in a broad sense, that's true, because that's what Congress does. Everything that Congress does is political by definition.
Right.
But I think he means in a more narrow sense that it is, crass political motives that have to do with opposing him just because he's a Democrat, or have to do with getting reelected, which is a little bit puzzling because he's saying this is overwhelmingly popular. And so in a democracy, you would think that if something is overwhelmingly popular, if somebody is simply interested in getting reelected, that would be something he would support. So that's sort of contradictory. But clearly, whatever the motives are of the opposition, they are not pure like his. And that's the main point that he's trying to get across.
Absolutely. And, we've called it the campaign of shame here on this program, because we're starting with last week. The word shame has been thrown around a lot when it comes to objections to these gun control proposals. And yet, again, you look at the compromise that was offered today. What would that have done to prevent the murders at Sandy Hook Elementary if that had been in place? Absolutely nothing.
Don't even want you to think about that. Now you've gone too far. Now you're starting to think logically, and of course, this whole campaign is designed to avoid, prevent people from thinking logically. You're supposed to think emotionally, to the extent that can be called thinking at all.
Right.
He presents you with these grieving parents. Literally, he trots them out and has them talk about the loss of their children. It's a terrible thing. There's no question about it. And then he says, pass this. If you care about these poor grieving parents, pass this. Well, there's no logical connection there at all. And if you say to him, how would a background check have prevented the massacre at Sandy Hook, there is no logical response to that, because, of course, the guy who committed these murders, it looks like he would have passed a background check, first of all. He doesn't seem to have a disqualifying criminal record or psychiatric record. In any case, he used his mother's guns, and she purchased those legally. So it's completely irrelevant. And yet somehow, because of that event, we were supposed to pass this background check requirement.
Right. And yet, you look at the case in Colorado of James Holmes, and we learned this week that his psychiatrist had contacted campus police a month before these shootings and had said, this guy's making homicidal threats. I think he's a threat to public safety. He's threatening me. And apparently there was no contact. There was no follow-up from law enforcement. Now, again, Jacob, all of these efforts to pass, and I got to say, I think at this point it is all political for the president. The president wants some sort of victory here, even if it has nothing to do with protecting lives. We could really make a difference by focusing on these things, the failure of authorities and institutions to investigate when somebody says, okay, there's something clearly off with this individual.
Right. I would be cautious about that because, in retrospect, it's always easy to say this guy was clearly dangerous.
Okay,
right?
well, let's put and look, I'm not talking about, making it easy to throw somebody in a mental institution because you say, all right, he's talking to a squirrel in a park. But when you contact law enforcement as a mental health professional and say, my client is making homicidal threats and I'm concerned about the public, I expect law enforcement to follow up with that.
Yes, I think that's a reasonable expectation. But is that something that you're going to get congressional legislation for? I mean, that's not something that Congress is going to require. That's a matter of state and local law enforcement. They need something that they want a bill that they can pass in Washington, so they can say they did something.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it is totally irrelevant insofar as these mass shootings go, if it has nothing to do with preventing them, they want to be able to say that they did something. If you don't agree with them, and if you start to question it and say, how could this have worked? Exactly, explain this to me. Now already you've shown that you're evil, right?
Right.
And I mean, you may recall the front page headline in the Daily News after it turned out that Feinstein's assault weapon ban was not going to be part of the main Democratic proposal. The Daily News ran this front page headline showing all of the murdered children in a square around a headline that said "Shame on U.S." For not passing this assault weapon ban.
Right.
Never mind that passing it. Had it been in place. In fact, they did have an assault weapon ban in Connecticut. It was very similar to the federal one that expired.
Mm-hmm.
It obviously did not prevent the massacre. Now they've added that particular gun that he used in that crime to the list of prohibited weapons. Well, there are lots of other weapons, you could use that would not be covered by that ban that would be just as deadly. So it is totally illogical, but at the same time, if you don't support it, you're supposed to be ashamed of yourself.
Yeah. Well, listen, I know that the campaign of shame is going to ratchet up over the next couple of days here as the vote and the debate begins in the Senate. Jacob, thank you again, sir, for covering this issue, and I really appreciate your time today.
Sure, thank you.
You bet. Jacob Sullum joining us from Reason Magazine here on Cam & Company.